The morning of November 21st, 1944, is so thick with fog that a man can lose sight of his own hand. Somewhere inside the Hurtgen Forest, on ground the American Army has already fed 3 divisions into and gotten almost nothing back. A 36-year-old staff sergeant steps over a strand of barbed wire and walks into a German minefield on purpose. His name is John Minick, and only weeks before, older men in his own company had quietly bet he would break. He was the soldier who cried his first night in France. In the next hour, he will kill 20 enemy soldiers, capture 20 more, and take on an entire German company by himself. What you are about to hear is the true story of how the man everyone doubted became the reason his company lived, and why his story is one of the most heartbreaking Medal of Honor stories of the entire war. Hold on to that first detail, because it matters more than any of the numbers. This man cried. Remember that. Let me take you back to the summer of that same year, to a field in Normandy, where the 8th Infantry Division was gathering before the front. That is where most of the men in Company 1 first laid eyes on John Minick, and what they saw did not impress a single one of them. He was 36 years old, which, in a rifle company, made him ancient. Most of the men around him were teenagers, or barely into their 20s. He stood about 5'8", weighed around 150 pounds, was going bald, and wore a thin, scraggly mustache that made him look tired before the fighting had even started. He did not care much for a clean uniform, and it showed. Here is the thing that nobody expected. On his first night in France, according to the men who were there, John Minick was so frightened of what was coming that he wept in the dark. Word of that kind of thing travels fast in a company. His commander, a Texan named Captain Jack Melton, took one look at this aging, unimpressive private and made a decision. He told his platoon leader, Lieutenant Stanley Schwartz, to keep a close eye on Minick so they could pull him off the line quickly if he could not handle combat. Melton did not want a man who might get other soldiers killed. That was the reputation John Minick carried into the war. A liability. Someone to watch and probably to get rid of. Then the shooting started, and everything the company thought it knew turned out to be wrong. At the port of Malo in Brittany, Minick did something that made no sense for a man who had cried in the dark. He separated himself from his patrol, worked forward alone, and knocked out a German position that had just destroyed 2 American Sherman tanks. A few days later, he slipped around the flank of a German counterattack and stopped it cold with a few bursts of fire. Captain Melton recommended him for the Distinguished Service Cross and pinned staff sergeant stripes on him. The man they had planned to send home had become one of the best combat soldiers in the outfit. He was still a difficult man to command when the guns were quiet. He drank hard between fights, cognac being his favorite, and the military police brought him back to the company more than once. Twice Melton busted him back down to private. Both times, when the unit returned to combat, he handed the stripes right back, because in a fight there was nobody Melton wanted more. Minick carried a captured German machine gun instead of an American one, and his reason was simple. In his words, it shot real good, and it did not jam. On freezing mornings, when other men warmed their weapons over campfires so the grease would not lock up, Minick warmed his a different way, by urinating on it, so it would never fail him when the Germans attacked at dawn. He asked little of his men when it came to polish, but he was deadly serious about soldiering, and he never lacked volunteers for a patrol, because Minick was always the first man to raise his hand. Melton later wrote something that tells you how far this man had come. He said that long before they reached the Hurtgen, Sergeant Minick's name had become synonymous with the gallantry of the infantry soldier of the 8th Division. Sit with that for a moment. The soldier who cried had become the standard other men were measured against.
Now I need to tell you about the place where all of this ends, because the forest is almost a character in this story. The Hurtgen Forest sits along the German border south of Aachen, a dense stretch of tall firs planted in neat, dark rows. American soldiers who fought there gave it a name that never made the newspapers back home. They called it the Death Factory. From September of 1944 into that winter, the U.S. Army poured division after division into those trees, and the forest chewed them up and handed back almost nothing. It became the longest battle the United States Army had fought on German soil, and by the time it ended, the U.S. First Army had suffered at least 33,000 killed and wounded, with some counts reaching as high as 55,000. Ernest Hemingway, who covered the fighting as a correspondent for Collier's and was a friend of one of the regimental commanders, called the coming battle Passchendaele, with tree bursts. That phrase, tree bursts, is the key to understanding the horror of it. When German artillery shells struck the tops of those 100-foot firs, they exploded in the air instead of the ground, and they rained steel splinters and jagged wood down on the men below. Digging a foxhole did not save you, because the death came from above. On top of that, the Germans had turned the forest floor into a trap. They sowed it with Schu mines, small wooden boxes that metal detectors could not find, and with the weapon the GIs feared most, the S mine, nicknamed the Bouncing Betty. Step on one, and it did not simply explode at your feet. It leaped waist-high into the air first, then burst, spraying steel balls in every direction. Add barbed wire, log bunkers, and machine guns firing down the perfectly straight lanes between the trees, and you begin to understand what John Minick's company was ordered to walk into. The Germans holding this ground were from the 275th Infantry Division, commanded by General Hans Schmidt, and they were worn thin. Roughly half of the division's defenders had already been killed, wounded, or captured in the earlier fighting, and the replacements sent to plug the gaps included 2 companies of policemen from the town of Duven, men the Germans themselves called the family fathers, because most of them were at least 45 years old. Schmidt later described the forest in words that could have come from any American who survived it. He said the weird and wild surroundings intensified every reaction, that the shells bursting in the treetops were far worse because of the falling and splintering wood, and that the enemy often appeared suddenly close at hand in embittered close combat. Remember that line, because in a few minutes, John Minick is going to become the thing those German soldiers feared, the enemy who appears suddenly, close at hand. The 8th Infantry Division came into the line to relieve the battered 4th Division, and the job of leading the main attack fell to the 121st Infantry Regiment. This is where the odds get almost unfair. The 121st had arrived only hours before the attack was set to jump off at 9 in the morning. The men had never seen the ground. They had no real intelligence on where the enemy was dug in. Before they stepped off, American guns hammered the German lines, and the division artillery alone fired more than 9,000 shells into the woods. The air support that was supposed to help had to be cancelled because of the fog. So the infantry went in blind, into a forest that had already killed thousands, with mist so heavy they could barely see the next row of trees. Company I pushed forward about 200 meters, and then it stopped. In front of the men lay a belt of concertina wire, and covering that wire were 2 German machine guns. Beyond the wire was a minefield. The machine guns opened up, and the fire brought a mortar barrage down on top of the company, and the shells began bursting in the trees, sending that lethal rain down on men who had nowhere to hide. Company 1 was pinned in the worst possible spot. They could not go back, and they could not go forward. Every minute they lay there, more of them died. Before I tell you what one man did about that, I have to stop for just a moment. If you are the kind of person who believes these stories should not stay buried, that the men who did the impossible deserve to be remembered by name, then subscribe, because there are more of these forgotten men coming, and I do not want you to miss the next one. Now, back to the fog and back to the wire, where a 36-year-old sergeant is about to make a decision that saves everyone around him. John Minick crawled over to his captain, the Texan he had nicknamed Cowboy, and said something almost casual, given what was in front of them. He asked Melton to follow old Minick, because he thought there was a way through this stuff. Then he did what he had always done. He separated himself from everyone else and went first. 4 men went with him into the wire. Picture this carefully. He is threading a path through barbed wire and shattered debris, and then into an active minefield, feeling for the mines that could throw him into the air at any step, and he keeps going for 300 yards. 300 yards, alone at the front, until he is that far ahead of his own company. When a machine gun opened fire on his little group, Minick did not hit the dirt and wait. He signaled his men into cover, then edged along the flank of that gun by himself, got close, and opened fire. 2 of the crew he killed, 3 more he captured. 1 machine gun that had been tearing his company apart went silent because 1 man decided to walk up to it. Then it stopped being a raid and became something almost impossible to believe. Minick moved forward again through the fog, waving his 3 prisoners ahead of him along what he hoped was a safe path, and a German soldier suddenly loomed up out of the mist, reaching for his pistol. Minick shot him. What he did not realize was that he had just walked directly into the middle of a German command post. Enemy soldiers began pouring out of a bunker right in front of him. He dropped to the ground and started firing, and in the confusion of the fog, with men shouting and shooting at ranges of a few yards, John Minick fought an entire company of German infantry essentially by himself. 20 German soldiers lay dead when the firing died down. 20 more, stunned and bewildered, had thrown down their weapons and surrendered to a single balding sergeant. 20 killed and 20 captured, by 1 man, in a fog so thick the enemy never understood how few Americans were actually there. His platoon finally caught up and rounded up the rest of the company. Minick simply ordered the prisoners sent to the rear, reloaded, and kept going. He was not finished. He pressed ahead of his platoon again and ran into yet another machine gun. He crawled forward until he could knock it out too. That is the 2nd gun crew he silenced with his own hands that morning. Behind him, Company I was moving because he had cleared the way, one impossible obstacle at a time. And here the story turns, the way these stories so often do. There was still another minefield to cross, and once again John Minick went first, because that was who he had become, the man who always went first, so the younger men would not have to. Lieutenant Schwartz and a sergeant named Fred Hayes were trying desperately to find him in the trees. They could hear him. He was somewhere ahead in the fog, still fighting, still daring the enemy to face him, and the last words his men heard him shout were a challenge flung into the mist. He was yelling for the Germans to come out and fight. Then there was an explosion, and the shouting stopped. John Minick had stepped on a mine, and it killed him instantly. He died at the very front, alone, the same way he had fought all morning. When Schwartz rushed forward to reach him, he stepped on a mine too, and lost a leg. Company 1 swept past the spot where the 2 men had fallen and took the German positions on the ridge that had cost so much. In the fighting and the defense that followed, the company was gutted, suffering more than 140 casualties. When it was finally relieved, Captain Melton, wounded himself, walked off that ridge with only 11 men still standing. 11 men out of a full company. That is the arithmetic of the death factory, and every one of those 11 owed part of their survival to the oldest man in the outfit. Melton put it plainly in his report to the War Department. He wrote that the actions of Staff Sergeant John W. Minick in that attack saved the entire company from complete annihilation. Now think back to where this began. This is the man who arrived in Normandy so frightened that he cried in the dark. This is the private his captain planned to quietly send home before he got somebody killed. He turned out to be the bravest soldier any of them had ever seen, and the reason so many of them lived to grow old. The army did not forget him, though it took time. On December 11, 1948, 4 years after that morning in the fog, General Omar Bradley presented the Medal of Honor to Minick's widow. His official citation lays out the whole sequence in the flat, careful language the Army uses: the 4 men, the 300 yards, the 2 members of the gun crew, the entire company, the 20 killed and 20 captured, the 2nd machine gun knocked out of action, and then the last line, that while moving forward alone through constant enemy fire, he detonated a mine and was instantly killed. John Minick was brought home to Pennsylvania and buried at Westminster Cemetery in Carlisle, the town he had gone to war from. Today, his name is carved on the Cumberland County Medal of Honor Memorial, alongside the other men from that corner of Pennsylvania who received the nation's highest award. There is a detail I keep coming back to. Minick had already earned a Bronze Star and been recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross before the Hurtgen. He did not have to keep volunteering. He did not have to go first through every wire and every minefield. A man who had proved himself many times over could have let someone younger take the point. He never did. So here is what I want to leave you with. We tell ourselves that heroes are the men who were never afraid, the ones who were born without the fear the rest of us carry. John Minick was not that man. He was afraid. So afraid that on his first night at war, he cried. And he went forward anyway, again and again, until the very last step of his life. That leaves the real question with you, whether courage is the absence of fear or something much harder. The choice to walk into the minefield precisely because you are the one most afraid of it, and you will not let the younger men go in your place. Tell me what you think in the comments, because I read every one of them.